What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Jeremy Gumila, aka Gem, and I'm going to give you a card-by-card breakdown of my deck list that I just played this past weekend at LAIC. In addition, I'm also going to tell you how I utilize these cards throughout the weekend into particular matchups. However, I'm not going to go into full detail because I already did that in my article, which if you don't already, subscribe to our Patreon and you can see exactly how I approached each matchup, how I was able to make the most of every single card in my deck, and you could always support the Shuffle Squad by doing so. Now, without further ado, I'm going to do a breakdown of my exact 60 that I took to LAIC. First, I'm going to break down the Pokemon, and in terms of the Ralts line, it's pretty standard. I played 3 Teleportation Burst Ralts. The reason I did that is because it could randomly come in handy when you only have 1 Ralts in play and you want to attack with it and then put something else up so you're not putting your Ralts in harm's way. And on top of that, it does randomly come in clutch for control. If you could set those up, it's not much of an energy commitment to get it out of the active. As for the memory skip Ralts, I think it randomly comes in clutch when your opponent only has 1 attacker on the board. I'm not sure exactly if I would play this at the next event due to the rise in Iron Valiant. However, it does randomly come in clutch to be able to skip your opponent's turn and really punish them if they don't have a backup setter or a switch card in their hand. Now moving on to the Kirlias, 3 refinement is pretty standard as you want all of your energy and dead cards in the discard, and it allows you to draw 2 cards. And then lastly, the Mirage Step Kirlia makes sense just because you do rely a lot on Mirage Step now, more than usual for sure, especially with only 2 Rare Candy in my deck. I did find myself Mirage Stepping a lot, and it was super convenient. Now to talk about the EX count, I think 2 Gardevoir EX is pretty standard. It's your entire way to move energy around from your discard, power up all of your attackers, definitely makes sense to play 2. And then as for Shining Arcana Gardevoir, definitely play 2. It can deal with very heavy attackers. It pairs great with reversal energy, and it's also another way to draw cards. Speaking of drawing cards, I also played Radiant Greninja in my deck. Radiant Greninja also flowed well with this deck because I was able to discard a Psychic Energy, which you wanted to discard anyways, and draw 2 cards if you're not under Path to the Peak, of course. It definitely was a great way to run through your deck even faster, especially with those games you're going to rely on Mirage Step. Radiant Greninja kind of helps make up for those cards you weren't seeing turn 2 refinement. And then, of course, I want to protect my Ralts, my Kirlias, so I played Manaphy. I played Screamtail, which is a new addition via Paradox Rift. And Screamtail was a very strong card because you're able to attack your opponent's bench if they don't have a Manaphy. And it's another attacker to hit for a lot of damage without giving up more than 1 prize. So it was definitely a great replacement for Zacian V. There were many times I found it myself in the mirror using Avery, then using Screamtail to snipe a Kirlia. Definitely a super strong card. I think it was one of my favorite cards in the deck, and I attacked with it all weekend. And the last Pokemon that I played was Jirachi. Jirachi was also just released in Paradox Rift, and the reason that I played it is because it made the matchup for Giratina V-Star much stronger, because when you put a whole bunch of damage on your attackers, your opponent isn't able to just take 2-3 prize knockouts with Sableye like they usually did in the Lost Box, because you have the Jirachi that protects your entire bench. So Jirachi, super strong Pokemon, definitely worked well all weekend for me. Now to break down my energy, I kept it standard from last format. It felt extremely comfortable and flowed well in testing. 10 basic Psychic Energy just makes sense. And especially when you're using Mirage Step, 2 Reversal Energy is so much more useful. I did test a little bit with 3 Reversal Energy, 9 basic Psychics. There was a point where I was only down to 8 basic Psychics. I tested a lot for this event, and my personal opinion, I believe that 10 basic Psychic Energies and 3 Reversal Energies was the strongest, most consistent way to play this deck. Now to go into my trainer count. I know a lot of people are looking at my VIPs and like, why is he only playing 3? I asked myself that question too, to be completely honest with you. I was going to play 0 VIP going up to the event. In testing, I just liked VIP a lot more. The night before, I was talked into taking out VIP out of my list, but then I threw it in the morning of, and it was great for me. If I could have played a fourth one, I would have. I just don't know exactly what I would cut because, as previously mentioned, I wouldn't touch the selection of my Pokemon. I wouldn't touch the selection of my energy, and the trainers, as is, are extremely tight. Now, if I were to play a fourth VIP, I would probably cut my second Artazon, which I was planning to do previously, which you can see that's why it doesn't match the gold stadiums across the board, because I threw that in last minute and didn't feel that I needed a fourth VIP, especially because my strategy in a lot of matchups was to utilize Mirage Step. But at the same time, I wanted to establish my board as much as possible on turn 1. So I didn't feel comfortable enough to go to 0 VIP. However, 3 VIP and relying on Mirage Step was an extremely strong strategy all weekend. I also played 3 Ultra Ball, and I think 3 Ultra Ball is about as much as I could fit into the deck. If I could have fit a fourth one, honestly, I would have, but Ultra Ball is just extremely strong. I mean, it could search any Pokemon in your deck, and it could also be a great outlet to discard energies or battle VIPs after turn 1, all of that. So Ultra Ball definitely works for the deck, especially turns you know you're going to get Iono'd maybe once you already dig through your whole deck and you're just trying to thin out as much as possible. Definitely a great card to play in your deck. Moving forward, I played 4 Level Ball. I think this is extremely standard, just because, again, Level Ball searches out your Manaphy, your Screamtail, your Jirachi, your Ralts, your Kirlia, all things that you want to see on the first and second turn of the game. So Level Ball, it just makes sense to play 4 of them, and you could see all of those cards that you want to see and grab all those Pokemon as often as you can. Now, to break down my Fog Crystal, I only played 2 Fog Crystal, simply, again, because I had literally no room, or I felt that I didn't have room to cut anything else. If I could play a third or fourth one, honestly, I would. It's super strong to grab energy. For instance, there would be turns where I would want to refinement an energy away, but I didn't have an energy in hand, so I'll go out and search it with Fog Crystal, or I miss getting down a couple Ralts turn 1. That's definitely a great outlet to grab Ralts with, and it just makes sense in the deck overall. Again, Fog Crystal, super strong in all Psychic decks, and if I could have played a third and fourth one, I honestly would have. Now, moving forward, I played 2 Super Rod. I think this is pretty standard in the list. You definitely want to put your attackers back into the deck. You want to put your Kirlias back. You want to put your Ralts back. It really just depends on the matchup. Obviously, in decks that can power up a Radiant Greninja and they kill your Manaphy, you definitely want to rod it back in and then search it back out. So Super Rod makes sense in that essence. Or there's games where you attack with a Shining Arcana, maybe you prized your other one and you need it back to swing with later in the game. So you put the Shining Arcana back, and then same with Gardevoir EX when you don't have access to any, or you just want to increase your odds of finding one. If they knock out your first one, you can put it back in the deck before you begin your refinements, your concealed cards, your Shining Arcanas, all of that stuff. It just makes sense to play 2 rods in the deck. Honestly, a little bit in testing, I was thinking about a third one, but that would be like the 65th card in the deck. So I figured it wasn't going to be feasible for this event for sure. Now, a card I was super excited to play is Counter Catcher. I think Counter Catcher may have been the strongest card in the deck, honestly, all weekend. It really helped me in so many matchups, especially because you're going to Mirage Step. You typically go down in prizing. The way I see it is I'm pretty much playing 3 bosses orders, whereas pre-rotation I was playing 2. So pretty much having an extra boss, because you're pretty much always down in prizing up until mid to late game, makes a lot of sense. And then on top of that, it's not your supporter for turn. So you're able to counter catcher up your opponent's strongest attacker and maybe Iono disrupt their hand or Avery disrupt their bench. There were so many combinations you could do with counter catcher, but to make it as easy as possible, pretty much the most common ones where when I knew my opponent or I assumed my opponent had something they needed to win the game the next couple turns, I would chain counter catcher with Iono, And then when I want to disrupt their bench and see more cards, I would Avery and counter catcher a main attacker they choose. And again, the reason that that combination is so strong is because when you Avery them, they're getting rid of two things they most of the time don't want to get rid of. And then if you counter catcher them after, you're getting three things off the board that they would have preferred to keep. And then you're leaving your opponent with just three Pokemon if you're able to knock out the Pokemon you counter catcher up. Now to break down my Rare Candy, I'm only playing 2 Rare Candy, and that's just because, again, in this format, I'm relying a lot on Mirage Step. I never attacked turn 2 in the entire tournament. There wasn't once a time. The only time I would honestly consider it is if I had the chance to donk my opponent or maybe kill a solo attacker if the rest of their bench is support. But honestly, I never see a reason to have to attack on turn 2. There were times I even drew into it and I just chose not to attack because I either Mirage Step or I just refinemented to accelerate my board, because when playing Gardevoir EX, I believe success in the deck is prioritizing your board state over the amount of prizes you're taking, because it seems that the deck struggles less with taking prizes rather than setting up and getting the board all good and strong. So at the end of the day, I will always prioritize a board over the prizes. Now, my one-of items, I played a Pal Pad. I think Pal Pad's just super convenient to put back your one-of boss, your one-of Professor Turo's, Avery's for late game, just drawing 3, Iono's if you want to continue to disrupt your opponent's hand. I think it just made sense. If I were to cut one of the cards for something that else, Pal Pad might be one of them. However, my personal preference, I really like Pal Pad. In a couple mirrors, I did miss Cresselia, so maybe I would switch out Pal Pad for Cresselia moving forward, but I'm not exactly sure yet. We'd have to see where the meta falls. The Luxurious Cape, also a new card that came out in Paradox Rift. This card is so strong. The ability to activate your own reversal energies paired with Lost Vacuum is crazy. Shout out to my teammate Cal Connor and myself. We both talked about different times throughout the tournament where we were tied 2-2 in prizing. We would put on the Luxurious Cape, load up something, purposely knock ourselves out with the Lost Vacuum, put our opponent to 1 prize, and then counter catcher, reversal energy, take their only attacker off the board while Iono sticking them to 1. This was so strong all weekend, and honestly, pairing this with the Lost Vacuums, the reversal energies, the counter catchers makes this card so much stronger. And even if you don't need to vacuum yourself, being able to hit for 360 with Screamtail is crazy. Especially, again, a lot of times if my opponent didn't play Manaphy, I would counter catcher up maybe something that they didn't want in the active, and then Screamtail knock out a main attacker. For instance, in the tournament, actually, I counter catchered up a Manaphy against Lost Zone Giratina. I'm sorry, not a Manaphy. A Radiant Greninja. They did not have Manaphy on the board, and I was able to use Screamtail to kill their only Giratina V-Star in play. That was a super interesting play, and I think that this card definitely helped swing the matchup for Lost Zone Tina, because Lost Zone Giratina before Paradox Rift was definitely a shaky matchup. And even now, there are times that it gets a little bit shaky throughout the match. And most of the time, opponents on each side of the matchup don't know who's going to win the game up until those last couple turns. Luxurious Cape is definitely one of those cards that helps swing that matchup. Now for my stadium count, I knew that Tina would be very big, and I know that a lot of Giratina was playing only 3 Path to the Peaks, which is why I actually cut that 4th VIP for a second Artazon, because for me, having 4 outs to Path to the Peak while my opponent only plays 3 Path, I always win the Stadium War, so it was never a problem for me. And again, I think that Artazon, at the end of the day, if you have a slow setup, it could help you set up, but it was more so to bump Path to the Peak, and then conveniently I would just grab basics to help set up as well. But rarely did I ever just play Artazon not to bump Path, unless I knew the deck didn't play Path, or I really was desperate to get my board set up. Going into my supporter line, I think my supporter line was perfect. I wouldn't add or change any supporters at all. And again, this is just my personal opinion, but 4 Iono is super strong in the deck, being able to disrupt your opponent's hand, especially when you're relying on Mirage Step, you have Counter Catcher, you have Reversal Energies, you're always behind in prizes. So being able to disrupt your opponent's hand and stick them to less cards than you have in hand while setting up and drawing all these cards with Refinement, Concealed Cards, it's extremely strong. So I wouldn't go below 4 Iono, but again, this is just my personal preference. Double Avery, I think, was so strong for Lost Zone Giratina and the mirror. When I played a couple mirrors, a lot of them did not expect a second Avery. So a lot of times it left them having to get rid of 2 things that they did not want to get rid of. And then on top of that, I could Counter Catcher up a 3rd thing they don't want to get rid of and knock that out as well. So Avery, super strong. I would definitely play 2. Honestly, there were even games where I Pal Padded both Averys back in. So Avery, super strong card. Professor Turo's, I think, is kind of the same reason you play Collapsed Stadium, where you can set up all 1 prizes on the board and you can collapse the way Gardevoir EX. Well, now you have the power to pick it back up and you can just hold it for next turn. So that makes it so strong. There were so many times in the tournament where my opponent and I are both at 2 prizes. They definitely play a way to knock out my Gardevoir EX. So I would just load up 2 attackers, pick it up, and just checkmate the game from there. And then Boss's Orders, of course, you always want to have a way to bring up anything from your opponent's bench. I know we play Counter Catchers, but late game when you guys are tied in prizes or maybe you're ahead in prizes, it is still nice to have the Boss's Orders. So again, that was my breakdown of my full 60. If you have any questions, feel free to tweet me, DM me. I'll answer all of them to the best of my ability. However, again, I thank you all so much for listening. I think that this list was perfect for me as a player. However, if I were to make a change or 2, again, I mentioned how I would maybe play Cresselia back instead of Pal Pad. But even then, I was happy with my result. I was happy with my finish. I finished 17th at LAIC. I lost back-to-back win-and-ins, unfortunately, to top 8. But we'll get them next time. And yeah, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate all the support, and I'll see you guys next time.
Hey trainers, tired of having too many cards lying around? I know that feeling, and I know what a hassle it is to try and sell those cards. But selling bulk is now easier than ever with TCG Bulk. Find tons of potential buyers in a single place. You just download the app, look for the best buyer near you, and carefully pack your bulk, ship it, and you get paid. It really is that simple. Turn the cards you don't want into the cards you absolutely need for your next deck. Thank you so much for watching this entire video from the Shuffle Squad. Honestly, from the bottom of our hearts, we appreciate each and every person that supports our content, watches what we have going on every single day, every single week, even from time to time, and continuously allows us to have a forum to project our creative content towards the Pokemon TCG community. So if you haven't already, be sure to give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and even leave a comment to help boost the YouTube algorithm. That being said, we'll catch you with our next video.